That should have hopefully worked. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to get started here real quickly. Just wanted to double check on some of the technical stuff, and looks like we're good for the moment. Audio, video seems to be popping up. So, for our current session today, we're going to just be hanging out for a little bit, sketching, drawing as we normally do. These sort of sessions, like I said, I try to do once every couple of weeks or so, if possible. In this current round of classes that are going on at the moment, my Mondays and Fridays are kind of opening up a little bit. So I'm hoping to take advantage of that now. Either way, welcome to the channel, everyone, and we're here just to hang out for a bit and just to have a bit of Q&A, talk with each other, build a community, and the sketch and draw, with everyone. So if you're hanging out for the moment and watching live with me, not only can you interact and talk and ask questions, but you can also very much sketch on your own. So if you do have things like materials, pens, and papers and stuff, if you have a minute to just like hang out, relax a little bit, please take advantage of the time with me, and we'll see what we can produce. So if anybody else has other things that are going on in terms of things that they're working on, they're having this stuff in the background. Great, again, welcome. So let's just talk a bit about what's going to happen for our current live session. First and foremost, as you can see, nothing is set up in terms of what's going to happen in terms of the sketch. We just use just blank sheet paper. We're using the Amalfi paper that I got from Italy. This is in a large format sheet, probably about 11 by 14 or so. And I'll be using my Esterbrook fountain pen, which I was able to procure a couple of weeks ago. So I'll sketch with this as well too. I don't really exactly have an idea what we're going to be sketching just yet, so we'll figure that out as we go. I was playing with some ideas of some sort of creature-based things, a mount with a character, maybe running along. Maybe been inspired by some of the Monster Hunter stuff recently that's been going on, especially with being able to play that game. So we might do something inspired based on that. It may not be necessarily exactly off of that brand or of that property, but things that are somewhat similar are perfectly fine with me. So at this point, if anybody else has any, or anybody has any questions, you're welcome to jump in if you want to. But we'll just start right away. Just start sketching. For those of you that are here for the first time, these are very kind of open, very organic flow format where we just get to hang out for a little bit. So with the fountain pen right now that I'm using, kind of zoom in a little bit closer. This particular sizing was this was a double B. This was a double bold fountain pen, and this one was grinded essentially, down to a certain shape by a nib grinder when I was in the LA Pen Show. Matthew Chen was his name. I'll put up his information in the description later on. So with this particular pen, the way it's been shaped and grinded, as typically to any other fountain pen, you can draw with it. Let me just grab a sticky note sheet, as you normally would with any sort of pen. Let me get this going. It's been sitting out for a little bit. Sometimes when the fountain pens sit, the ink coagulates a little bit, so it needs to kind of get going. This one I was using up last night as well too, so we'll see if there's enough ink in it. Seems to be okay. Sorry, I looked at it earlier. It seemed like it was all right, but the ink inside this may have also just, oh, there we go, starting to flow a little bit more. Just need to kind of give it a little bit of push, and it'll start to go. All right. So with fountain pens, as you can see, I'm kind of playing with it with one side, just kind of getting the ink flow going. I can get relatively heavier lines, thinner lines as well too, based on the direction of movement. You can move, whatever direction you'd want to, down, up. And this particular shape is more of a kind of almost like a diamond shape to the end of it, which allows me to kind of rotate the pen and get variant sizes as well too. Adds a little bit of flex to it. With these Esterbrookes, there's a little bit of flexibility, which is nice. But the benefit of these fountain pens is that, especially with this particular nib, I'm able to go from one end, which gives me a relatively heavier line, to flipping the pen upside down to be able to get a thin stroke. So this will give me the thin line that I need to do some of the underlay. And we'll see how this one goes. If it continues to be a little bit finicky, I'll switch it over to the other fountain pen, which is going to be this one here, the same Esterbrook, but this one being more of a bent nib. This is a fude nib, so this will still give me that nice flat, sort of heavier stroke, but I can still flip it upside down to get that thinner stroke that I want. So actually, give me 1 second, you guys. I'll be right back. So, let me actually jump out real quickly. I have to actually move my car. Apologies, everybody. I need to step out real quickly. Hang out for the moment. I know we're still live streaming, so we'll keep it running for the moment, but just hang out for a little bit. I'll be right back, maybe less than a few minutes. So, be right back. I'll put it in the chat and pin it. Okay, sorry about that. Had to go do something real quickly. Where we left off, just playing with some of the fountain pens, just making sure things are running okay. I think we'll stick with the fude nib. Let me just test this one more time. See if that flow is getting there now. Okay. Let's get into it. So I think what we're going to sketch, something kind of creature oriented. I want to have it kind of an up angle, running this direction. It's going to be a mount, so there'll be a character on top of it. Maybe facing that direction towards a bigger creature in the background. A little bit inspired by the Monster Hunter stuff. So we'll see how it goes. All right. So usually here, the first mark, the first couple of instances of like placing in shapes, marks, and lines will kind of dictate a lot of things very early on. So usually with pen drawing, and this is why people tend to want to go with an underlay, pencil, something like that, just so that you kind of know where things are being planned and stuff like this. But in these sort of pen drawings, being a lot more kind of present in the moment and really considering where things will go, commitment to the tool, commitment to the line, commitment to the idea, and then just going for it, right? Because like I said, I don't know exactly what the image looks like, but I have an idea. So these first few moments of the first couple lines would be the most important part. So what I'm going to do a lot of times here is go through a couple of bits of motion with the hand. And what it does is it kind of gives me an idea of placement, positioning. So this is something I do all the time. Whenever I do like a live drawing, big piece, small piece, it doesn't really matter. But I just kind of go through the habit of motion. And this motion is giving me a sense of like things of even gesture, positioning, marks, movements, scale. So get into the habit of like using your hands to help visualize things with being able to move without actually making a mark to it. So once you get that into that kind of behavior, it triggers into the very beginnings of of making sure your mind is kind of in the positions to think about a lot of this stuff, um, without having to feel like this expectation that it's got to be already set from the very get go. It's just general ideas right now. So I want to break it down to scale about here, right around here. And we'll throw the creature's head up in this direction and side. So right there, that first mark that I placed down. This is the top of the head of the animal. I'm going to go down this direction. I'm going to have it run towards us. Its claws are going to be kind of like coming towards the camera. Now I'm going to work it a little bit inside. And then just kind of feeling it as to like where things can be placed. Working in one area for the time being. I am thinking about certain details about how things can be kind of incorporated or integrated together. Things of, let's say, like a harness design, any decorative elements, details of the animal, things like that. I'm considering using memory, using things of past experiences, and seeing if I can just like bring it together. Sometimes it's very habitual stuff that I've done before are brought in, and then I'll also be conscious about that aspect of it and try to even break that and not want to use the same thing all the time. Now that I have a general idea about the head of the animal, I don't know where I want to go with this now. It's not 100% in terms of like its secured position and comfort level. And I would mention this a lot of times in my previous streams where it's like these first few moments, kind of establishes a good direction. And I usually feel like confident about where it's going. But there are other times in which it's like, I think this is where what I want to do with it. I think it'll work. Not quite sure yet. Is it close to even like what I almost felt or imagined it could be? And what am I missing right now? Let's turn the head down like this. It's gonna give it like wing-like structures. This is kind of like that again, that mount inspired by that whole Monster Hunter stuff. So I'm gonna use something similar of a design. Here's a claws coming towards. It's gonna go downwards. We'll have some kind of mount back here. From a scheme of how it's set in the paper, this is kind of where it's at. So the guy's gonna be up here. Tail will go back this direction. Arm going down over here, hitting the ground plane. Back legs will be risen up. So there'll be then a general direction of perspective this way. I'll put another creature in the background over here. So I'm starting to kind of get a sense of where things are placed now. Position of the head appears fine. If I put it way too far to the right, I would have run out of space. So being a bit more to the left would have been better, but I think this is okay. Because then I can also put the other creature a bit further on this end, which encapsulates the entire frame. So I'm being mindful of the space, layout, where things are going. I'll start to read some of the comments and questions now as people start to jump in. Eric was asking, other than just practice, you've heard about fitting your entire subject on the page. Any insight on how to do that? Kind of what we're talking about right now, being able to, well, for one, using prior experiences in being able to use that as a framework, predicting as to like what's going to happen. So are there images that are generated or are similar to this one? Not exactly, of course, but things that are somewhat similar. Sure, absolutely. As an idea, right? Which is we have like this creature stuff, dinosaurs or monsters, and we have this guy writing it. These kind of concepts are not brand new or original. Um, so I have play with concepts like this, but I'm able to then predict like where it's going to go. Now, again, thumbnailing is going to be your best bet. If you haven't really built a large amount of, let's say, experience or confidence in being able to go straight in there, and even for myself, if I was working on an illustration for a client or some other need of a professional job, I would thumbnail this to an extent of making sure there's enough information there for the client to look at to be able to prove it to move forward. So the thumbnail process is kind of the key. It's not about being able to solve it like right now, here and there on a single illustration, which it is kind of what I am doing, but in the industry that is very different. Um, so for the moment here, it's about being able to either rely upon your prior experiences, um, B, observational studies, things like other illustrations, artists, whatever the case is. And then from there, having the multiple thumbnail process work to be able to help alleviate that problem of like knowing where to put stuff. So use that as much as you can, the thumbnail. Let's keep going on. A lot of this stuff is right now just placing in general shapes, indications. Things will be tightened up. Like even here with that hand, it's very, gestural and loose. This indicates one digit. That's another digit right there. That could be another digit here, another digit coming down this direction. And then I kind of tie it all together by incorporating the details that I need. So it gives you, more detailed information about how it's comprised, how it's, anatomically put together. But at first, it's very loose, and the looser you work, the better, honestly, because if you try to go with that idea of making sure it's exactly where it needs to be from the very get go, it may be detail wise, structure wise, maybe well put together, but it loses an element of energy and life in your movement of line. So this hybrid, this balance between something that is very well thought out, planned or structured, with the combination of being able to move, is something to always find balance into. Anonymous artist is saying that you pre-ordered the book. Are you talking about the first dynamic Bible, Anonymous? Was that on the Liber Distri website or is it the Superani one? I'd be curious to know which one you're looking at, as like what website. Yeah, so the first dynamic Bible is being restocked right now. The second book is being worked on currently. I'm actually going into the pages at the moment. I'm hoping to get it done within the next, I'm hoping maybe 2 weeks or so. With a full book design and stuff like that will be wrapped up by the end of the month. But we'll see. That's the intent and the plan. Thumbnail process on the entire book is actually wrapped up. I just have a couple of more pages to do, thumbnailing wise, and then I'm going to go into the production cycle of making the pages. In terms of making books, like the educational book that I'm producing, Dynamic Bible and stuff like that, really the chunk of time that's the hardest for me is the planning, the processing of the thumbnails, trying to like figure out like all the text information, the layout, how many pages, what amount of content I'm putting in there. It takes a lot of, thought process. And so it's been quite the arduous sort of like going of it. But once I actually have that done, and then I have to just start drawing the pages, it's pretty quick at that point. Isaac, in terms of being in Australia, I believe Liber Distri should ship to you. I'm not 100% though. So that's something that you might have to like look into and research a little bit. Superani US would only ship to North America, I believe, maybe Canada. I don't remember. But liberdistry.com, they're based in Europe, should be able to ship to you. If they don't get it, I know that the US store here called Stewart Ing will get the book eventually, and they should ship to Australia. When they'll actually have copies of the book, that's a little bit undetermined at the moment. We're hoping maybe like late spring around this time. Let's keep going with this. Here's the other limb coming down. I'm going to be a little bit loose with this one as well too. This is going to be a kicking off of the ground plane. I want it to be a bit more of a silhouetted shape. We're going to put the hips all the way up to here. I'm going to put a mark right there just to give myself an idea of indication. We'll place in the character right from the get-go on this part. His leg is going to go back this direction. And the animal's feet are going to come close up that way. So right now, things are still kind of up in the air at the moment in terms of the shot and the posing. But once I get the character in, I'll feel a lot better. Some visual effects. So Nizan's asking, what is sit in seat for the dynamic sketching course? In my classes that I offer live online, I have two different positions of seats that you can partake in. One being a full seat, and the full seat positioning is where you come into the class, and not only do you then obviously participate, do the homework, but you will also then get full one-on-one feedback from me. So I look at your work, and we might even bring it into Photoshop, and I'll do drawovers and comments on how you can adjust and give you guidance on where to go with your actual homework. Sit in position gets access to the same demos, the lectures, the community of the Discord, but they don't get the one-on-one feedback with me because that's what those other people are paying for. So the class usually is limited to 10 seats for full seat position and up to 20 for sit in position. Now, the sit in position, the price is a fraction of the cost of the full seat. So you still get a lot of value out of that educational experience, but it's also then dependent upon how much you put into it. There's some people that sit in that just sit there just wanting to watch, to get familiar to the process, to get familiar to what the class is about, and also just to build a community. And also people that are actually, let's say part of the community already, having had taken the class, want to come back and sit in because they just want to be around the energy of working with people. So that's one way how a sit-in position can be used as well too, where you can return or you can explore and become familiarized to what's going on. Let's go straight into some of these little details, little shadow shapes like this, darkening up the line weight. Excuse me, I'm going to switch over to this other pen real quickly. I kind of like the marks made from this pen as well too. It's just a little bit broader. I don't want a super fine nib right now. Let me zoom in a little bit closer too. And we just continue to wrap up this area section up. Let's see some other question comments. So these, and hopefully that answered your question. Integrity X is asking, how do you know whether to put in details and leave out information in an area of detail? Well, in terms of that part, a lot of it I would say is answered through experimentation. As you do studies of things, of subjects, humans, animals, vehicles, mechanical details stuff, we always want to look at the real world at first to be able to acquire the data of information to inspire us to generate things, let's say like a creature here, where something like this can be inspired by birds and reptiles and prehistoric bone structure and animals that may have existed in the past. Um, but I'm still, having to pull from my imagination by first having seen things of the living world to be able to detail all these elements and things I'm showing you. But in terms of how I place in what information I give and don't give, is then through the experimentation, having done it multiple times. Now, as a study of exercise on your own, you can choose one subject matter, let's say a bird, and draw that bird like a, I don't know, it could be a parrot, 3 different times. And as you draw it once, you kind of let it happen naturally based on your instinctual choice as to what you want to do with it, surface information detail wise. Second iteration, you're going to start to edit. Well, do I need this? Do I need that? Do I want to give more of that one, less of this one? Third one, you repeat it again. As you repeat dozens and dozens of times, if not more so, gradually over maybe periods of months to then years. I'm not saying, you would do 12 drawings in a year, but I'm just saying that as time goes on and you do multiple iterations, you acquire the information or the data points as to like what you've done with it. And then you can make more of that selective decision and choice as to in the current moments of whatever you're drawing and sketching, of what it is you want and don't want in these areas of details, right? So it's about being able to visually see through experimentation, not only getting the answer being directed to you by some illustration, which is one, yeah, sort of like inspiration, seeing what other artists would do with it, but you also have to make the decision as well too. What do you want and what do you not want in the image, right? So you make the choices, and this is hard. Making decisions within an image and illustration as to what you're producing and what you want to show people is difficult because in the beginning we tend to kind of fall into a tunnel vision, which is we see information or we imagine information and we just want to give it because we also have this, I guess, natural directions towards kind of conveying more than less. We get stuck into the details. So being able to hold back, I would say, is much more difficult than doing too much. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does. I think it makes sense, but when I convey it, sometimes I don't want to feel like it's being jumbled up with too many other sort of like things. So I hope it does kind of clarify the ideas of being able to have information control of detail. Question from the doc is: do you think digital drawing is not good for study and can cause bad habits? Any material can cause bad habits. Pencil, ballpoint, felt tip pen, fountain pens, digital, watercolor. Every tool has an up and a down in that situation about what habitually you create as a downside. And downside is also very subjective as to what you would label that as, right? Um, so that is then determined based on experience. As you do more and more and more of it, you're able to see some of the patterns beginning to emerge, and also then compare notes to what you see through others. You get a sense of how efficient are you? Are you good about making design decisions? Is it clear in terms of story? Is it aesthetically pleasing? All these different things and elements you kind of have to get as experience over time as you acquire that information. Um, but strictly just purely digital, no. I mean, that's not the only area in which bad habits can emerge. But yes, there are for sure bad habits that can be there when it comes to digital. I guess another part of the question aligned to this is it better to maybe forego digital and stick with the traditional first and then go to digital afterwards? I would say in terms of working order, it makes more sense to go traditional first then the digital, because you begin to learn not about habits but about sensitivity to the material, pressure, speed. There's more of a tactile sense. You pick up on things. Where in digital, you don't really get that. You're just drawing on smooth glass. So you're not very sensitive, to your hand and also then to the visual, how to move, pressure, that sort of stuff. You don't really build a certain kind of muscle memory in ways that can help compared to, let's say, like on traditional. Where a lot of this traditional stuff can migrate over to the digital side. But whatever you pick up on digitally in terms of physical motion doesn't translate well to the traditional, based on my opinion, from what I've seen. Let's keep going with this a little bit. We'll come back to some other questions. In terms of recently, things I've been pondering, thinking about, things that have popped up. You know how social media is, the algorithm on that is so like in your face. As soon as you like search something or something pops up and you click on it, automatically like the algorithm just shows you only that. And recently on my feed, mainly things like on YouTube, Instagram at times here and there, I've been seeing a lot of videos of just people posting up they're kind of beginnings of drawing and sketching and how they're educating themselves and sharing their experiences and sharing their techniques. And it's interesting and cool to see that. And there's been a lot of this like draw box stuff that's been popping up a lot. And these videos are not necessarily like new. Some of them are, months old, years old, whatever the case is. But, YouTube is like shoving it in my face. Um, I haven't really watched a lot of them. They're just there. And I've been pondering. It's like, I wonder if I should maybe even like do a version, not a version of it. That's not really the best way to put it, but more of a video on being able to just talk about many things I do in class. In class, I talked, distinctly about the history of this course, the origins of it, where it comes from, and I realized like on YouTube videos, I don't really have anything like that. That kind of establishes, a lot of these techniques and what they're for. Even some of the questions I get here on live streams and stuff like this, where I can maybe even create a video that essentially answers a lot of them, but more of a packaged way. Where these live streams, it can be difficult for someone to sit there for hours going through the entire thing, but being able to have it kind of curated to like one single spot. I thought about making a video like that that just kind of talks about history, where the stuff comes from, the application of it, material discussions, mentalities, that sort of stuff. Not to say that those sort of questions wouldn't be allowed in a live stream as well too. It's just another place for people to be able to turn to get more of that information if they need. I've been thinking about it, so not sure if I'll do it just yet, but we'll see. A couple questions from above. Sorry, the feed sometimes goes pretty quickly of questions, so I have to kind of go back a little bit. Huddle was asking, are there any inks that you use in fountain pens that don't interact with watercolor once dried? I haven't really found any fountain pen friendly, so the one I use primarily, and the only one that you can really use that I found, is this one here. The Carbon Ink Platinum is really the only one. This one is water resistant. I wouldn't call it waterproof, but it will definitely, hold in terms of like water resistance and stuff like that. It's a good one. I've been using it for years. It's solid in terms of the use in terms of fountain pens. It doesn't ruin them in any way. It's a well produced material, so you can find it most in art stores. It's not scarce. It's not hard to find. So that's a good one to go for. Ahmed is asking how to have mindset of learning through mistakes and let go of drawing pretty pictures. That's a pretty big question that can be discussed for hours upon hours. As a philosophical one, but also as a technical one as well too. Um, but in general, to keep it quick, in what I would advise to most people on being able to let go of this idea of generating a aesthetic and ideal image and going more into the mindset of being able to learn through your mistake making as you have it. And that's being able to surround yourself with like-minded individuals that are going through that same sort of like process of build up in your education. If you're by yourself, you won't really permit yourself to do that at times because again you're inundated with so much inspiration, whether on social media or through books and looking at other people's work, and that expectation is through the roof. Not to say that you wouldn't get that in a classroom, because as you have competition of other students, you can feel the pressure as well too, but they're at least people you can interact with, on a day-to-day basis in a classroom situation. Like for the week, you can reach out to people online. If you're on a Discord or something like this, there's dialogue that can happen, and this ability or this opportunity of being able to discuss things, to share stuff, getting stuff off your chest as well too, especially in your frustrations, things you don't like. It can help bring the tension down a little bit, and being able to help remind you of what it is you're trying to intend and do. So that as you have others that are trying to do the same thing, you work together in force to have that sort of outcome potentially, which is to generate studies and to learn from your mistakes, not only making very nice looking images. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Ahmed. Eric was asking, how can I learn to deviate from the real color and make a more vibrant drawing? The real color, you might have to clarify that a little bit, Eric, and make a more vibrant drawing. Maybe are you talking about saturations, or are you talking about, let's say, the energy off of the piece? You might have to add to that a little bit for me, and then give me more in terms of data of a question, and I'll do the best I can to answer it. But based on what I'm reading there, it's a little bit. I was unsure as to what you mean. Color to then vibrancy of a drawing. I'm assuming again you're talking about vibrancy of color, but just confirm that for me, please. Vander, welcome. So Ayrton's asking, when did you switch from gestural drawing to form-oriented drawing? Well, the gestural drawing is still there in the form development. It's just you have to identify what gesture can mean for you, right? And I define gesture as being something that is two forms: gesture of the pose of this thing, and then the gestural line. So even if I'm developing form, I can still generate gestural line, right? Because if I'm making form, I'm not thinking about posing. If I'm just making a cube or an object of form structure, but the line can still be gestural. It doesn't have to be so rigid, stagnant, stiff. So the movement of line is also a definition of gesture that I use. So in that situation, I haven't really lost the gesture. In this case, this is a less gestural movement. It's a much more specified detail. But if I go to a different area, the gestural line can still come back. I can still move, just still flow. As I switch back over to something a bit more specified, intentional, right? Not that gestural line can't be intentional, but I'm also trying to feel and move with gesture. Question here is any suggestions on angle of canvas and sitting position? Started to get a lot of neck pain when drawing, which is uncomfortable when you draw every day. Trust me, I know everything about that. It's a discussion that I have quite extensively, detail wise, in my classroom. I won't go to that level here in this live stream, but in generality, my suggestion is a couple things. One, you can consider the idea of standing tables. Sitting may not be the best situation for you, especially if you're getting a lot of neck pain. Right now, I'm sitting on a table. Obviously, you can kind of see my chest, shoulder, torso is straight up. I am not necessarily hunched over. I'm not leaning into the drawing, right? I'm facing you guys directly in this way, and I don't necessarily twist or turn or lean in like this. I'm looking just straight down. Now, if it was a little bit more elevated, I wouldn't have to look down as severely, which would help me and my neck pain as well too. But I don't really get a lot of neck pain from drawing these days. I used to though. When I was a student, it was severe in terms of pain. But that's here or there. Most important thing is I would say height. So standing tables can be really, really good. If you can't afford them, if you can't acquire them, my suggestion is to be able to find tables that can come up a little higher, a little bit lower chairs. Bring it to about mid abdominal high will be ideal. But you got to engage everything of your body. Drawing is a physical thing, as you can obviously see. We're moving our hands. But it's not just a hand, it goes up into the arm, to the shoulder, to the neck, to the core, all the way to the back as well too. In a sitting position, it's the upper torso. Now, when I draw standing, I use my entire body. But in general, I would say focus on being able to engage your core, front and back as well too. So when you get comfortable, naturally your body's gonna start to slump, you know. But over time, you begin to train yourself and discipline enough where your brain automatically goes into where your brain and your body are in sync. So for me, my core and everything is somewhat engaged. I'm not tensing it, but it is being used. And this sort of physical engagement of drawing is not something a lot of artists probably bring up as much. I don't think it's a topic in classes as much either as well too. But for me, it's a very important element in what we do because longevity is not just based on whether you're obsolete or not, but it's also about your physical endurance and being able to do this an extension amount of days. Can you have the endurance to do so prolonged amount of time? And there are many people that will physically burn out, let alone mentally, but the physical part can be hard to come back from also, especially if you're injuring things like wrists and elbows and joints and stuff like that. Be mindful. I'm going to go down a little bit. Some other questions. Let's see. Nandan is asking, which drawing tool do you like the most to draw with? Mostly ink. Fountain pens like this is my everyday carry. This is the Esterbrook fountain pen. This is the stuff I carry with me most of the time. I will use felted pens as well too. Stuff like these kinds here. This is the Tombow felted pen. These ones are nice mainly because they're more felted brush pen. But I also like the sustainability and the long-term use of a fountain pen where it won't necessarily run out of ink on me because I can just refill it with a bottle of ink. We're just going to push on this a little bit more. We'll come back to the chat in just a moment. Just as a quick reminder that we are on YouTube. So if you guys can, give me a like. If you're not subscribing, please do so. I don't like to always promote that kind of stuff all the time, but just as a reminder, if you're not necessarily following me on here, you can do so on Instagram is where I usually post stories about when I come on live. Usually 10 minutes prior, I kind of post up there on stories as to like when I'm jumping on. These aren't planned. They're more just like in the moment of when I'm free. I will jump on and just sketch and draw for a little bit. And it's a way for me to continue to maintain a good community of people, especially when it comes to things like classes that I run and stuff like that. Word of mouth is pretty much all I have. So being able to engage with people out there and to help with questions, any direction and advice will, I would say, encourage the confidence of taking classes with me into the future. Which is why I'm going to be on here as much as I can because I think it's an important place of a community to build, and YouTube I think has always been a very positive place for me. So if you can share it, give subscribe, give at least a like, and that would help me along. As I said earlier, I was kind of on this not a spiraling of deep dive, but it was just there on my feed. I was just seeing constant videos of just people talking about dynamic sketching and how to draw a box stuff, and they're kind of like their own endeavors on being able to pursue drawing. And it's been interesting to see that there's a nice, still strong interest in people wanting to learn from the fundamentals and traditions. Um, but then I start to see how important like YouTube as a community still is, and why I want to be engaged with it even more in that sense. See some of the other questions here. So Eric came back here. So seeing artists such as Emily Hughes and such use of color that aren't there in the real world, however, still look like they belong, using very bright pinks and blues, for example, in places of gray. So if you're talking about color, it's a playfulness, right? Where it's not based on pure logic of color based on light. Because we're talking about color based on local colors of the subject matter as to what it is. The bird is blue, right? We can see that the bird pigmentation from the skin melanin to its feathers are naturally colored pigmented blue. But color we receive through our eyes because of light. So we need light sources to be able to help give the information as to what the color is. But in painting and creatively generating an image, does it mean that you have to follow the rules of nature and light, right? In that sense. And can we play with it? For sure, you can play with it because color is not as important as value. Value structures are what gives you dimension and form and depth and compositions and readability and all that sort of stuff. Color is very much play upon mood, right? Story. It's also functional. It's also very much the reality of the world around us. But when it comes to creatively playing with things, again, we're talking strictly about playing with color. If you want to learn about the rules of color, then we want to take color theory classes and understand how light and shadows kind of work on surfaces and how they react to different sort of surface and colors based on locals and the color filtrations of light, whether it's like a warm light or cool light and different color combinations of things. But if we're playing with color, there really are no rules. It's what it is you want to say. But as long as the value structuring is still strong, you can throw in whatever color you want. It doesn't matter. So even though the bird is blue, I can still throw in flashes of pink and reds and whatnot because I think it's playful. But also, if you want to say something, right, based on story, story is not always dictated by reality at times because we want people to feel. And if you want someone to feel something, color, shape, form, functionality can convey stuff, right? So this is why it's so difficult because it's still very much based on creative decision making they can make. It's not always based on set rules in the world of nature at times. We are inspired by nature. We pull from nature all the time. We begin there, but then we creatively mash things together and start to play with things and twist the way we want to. Eric, I hope that kind of gives you an idea. But there is no set standard saying that how you use those colors. That the pink has to be here, even though it's not there. No, you can put it wherever you want. Is it also then based on how you balance that, of course, and the aesthetic quality and elements about it, and through generating multiple images over time, you will begin to get a sense about how you actually maximize that sort of experimentation. Um, I would say there was a period in my youth when I was in school I very much felt the same way. Like I didn't understand why. Why is somebody using that weird color there? I don't see it. How are they making that decision? And for me, it didn't make sense because I was so logic based. Things function a certain way. Things are forms in a certain way. So I didn't necessarily break rules in this way. But the more you play with that material medium, you begin to find ways of being manipulated. Through manipulation, you understand that any rule set within the creative world of art and design can be bent or broken to some level. And I would say that's in every fundamental. Anatomy, even perspectives, can be bent or broken if you want to creatively push those things. But it does have to look nice, right? We are still talking about things that have to visually look attractive or interesting to us. But not every artist follows that. Sometimes they want to create things that are challenging or things that are, going against trends or whatever the case is. And they will actively choose to do so based on you as an artist as to what you want to do with it. But again, it kind of depends on what industry you're talking about. Creating things like animations or games have a little bit more of a standard production method. There can still be creative choices you can make on it. I don't know if there's as much sort of like abstraction or freedom that you have maybe within art and then commercial entertainment design. But either way, I think there's still room to do that. All right, let's go into the person up here, and he's gonna be facing out that direction. So what I want to do first is get a sense of his body pose. So I want to put his chest up here. I'm going to put some sort of like cowl fabric around his neck. We'll put a big kind of shoulder armor set on the left hand side. His right arm will be free. We'll have him face over that direction. Hair will be loose, long. Forearm will be here. Things will be loose, kind of hard to understand at first. Things are always a bit of a mess in the beginning. And that's one of the things about everyone says, trust your process all the time. But the reason why we say that is because whatever creative sort of approach we have as a technique, in the beginning, it always doesn't look very good. So we tend to kind of self doubt ourselves. And this is a part I think as students or young people or even, kind of amateur levels going into it in the beginning have a hard time breaking through because as they look at their work and they go into the very first steps, it's so difficult to overcome that mentality of feeling terrified, about what they're producing, that it's going to actually work because they can't predict what's going to happen. So in the beginning, it's such a mess. They're unwilling to even commit to it and see it through at times, but also that tends to kind of like poison the water. You almost kind of defeat it before you even have it let it chance to even go anywhere. Even though you still work on it, that you almost sabotage it in a way. But that confidence level stuff comes, definitely with time. That's obviously just purely experience most of the cases. Like even here, it's like I don't know exactly what this is going to look like and if it's going to work or not, but we're going to find out. But then you fall back on your fundamentals, and this is where you begin to like solve problems and see the resulting action. And at times, it's never going to be exactly what you intended or thought it would be, but a lot of times it can also be better. Let's see some more questions. Oops, sorry, I've been so off screen. My apologies. Let me zoom in a little bit. Sorry about that. I should check up on the screen once in a while. Let's see some more questions though. Just being some of the questions. Thank you for guys for replying each other on the chat, supporting each other in terms of questions. Mm. So, how do I depict form and depth with black and white alone? Value is what we're doing, right? So, shadows with dark to light can be conveyed through shadow forms. That alone can depict structure of form and depth. Obviously, line is the other part of it. Lines that show, let's say, direction, whether through convergence, things of shape being overlapped, scale change, large and small. A lot of the fundamental elements that we do in the same perspective type classes usually convey depth and form using just black and white. Let's put the other hand here. I have a long type of weapon. I'm not sure exactly what I want to hold just yet. I was thinking some kind of long blade coming out that way, but let's see. Maybe a long handle coming out like this. You know, those games, the Monster Hunter games, have such crazy weapon designs. They're placing like spikes and teeth and weird, like mechanical elements all over. Might be like wrapped in leather. Going off the screen now again, so let's pull back a little bit more. I'm just making it up, so it's not based on anything specific right now. I am playing the game at the moment, the Wilds. I was very aware of Monster Hunter for years, you know, even in my youth, but I actually never really fell into it when I was in my 20s and such. And it's been around such a long time, um, but for some reason I never really played it, and to this day, I actually even don't know why. I was aware of the art books. I was aware of like the creatures and stuff like that, and I've looked at them even back when I was, you know, in college and stuff like this, and you know, the early 2000s and stuff like that. I never really played the game. And then when Worlds came out, I tried it, but to be honest with you, I didn't really. It didn't click for me. And then when Wilds came out, I kind of wanted to try it again. obviously the most recent one out of the many, many, iterations of the game that have been around. This one, I would say, is a little bit more interesting. It's still just as visually complex when it comes to like the UI. I can't stand the UI. It's so hard to navigate through everything. Um, but at least the game is a little bit more approachable. It's not because the other ones were hard. It just felt really difficult to get through stuff to get to the meat of the game. Um, I don't mind grinding, but I think I lost my patience in grinding over the years of gaming as well too. So, and that's all that game is about. You sit there and you just refight those creatures over and over and over again. And I kind of lost patience with it. But this one is a little bit more quicker in pace, which is better suited for my schedule. Maybe that's one of the reasons why. Let's go back to some of the questions above. I'm going to go down a little bit. Videos Alit from Iraq, welcome. Glad you're here hanging out with us. I like having people from all over the world joining in. So here from Ronoa is asking, how do you suggest studying artists' work? For example, you're trying to study my style. What do you suggest that you focus on? Copies, right? To understand a person's style, you want to be able to go through the process of mimicry to come close on being able to see how well you can actually capture what's happened. And for me, that was a huge component of my sort of experience in my youth, where I did a lot of copies of work. Through the copying, though, in time, as you begin to mature in your educational sort of process, you begin to understand about what you want to extract because you begin to understand what that artist may have tried to do, but also what you favor. You begin to pull elements and pieces about that artist's work that you can start to implement, or I guess to integrate into your own, and also then hybrid into other people's work as well too. So copy is really one of the best places to begin on things. Um, from there, application has to happen. So it's not just being able to only mimic that person's style, because obviously you don't want to just stop there. You just be a copy of that person. What you want to be able to do is take that information and being able to implement it for yourself and making decisions on what you like and don't like, and hybrid it with many of the things, which creates a little bit of ownership because you make creative decisions as to what you want. So application goes into generating illustrations, doing designs based on your ideas, based on your concepts. Nomi is asking, what are the drawing fundamentals? You're saying a bunch of sites and artists say different things. Yeah, I would say people can have different opinions as to what they think the fundamentals are. But for me, there are the trinity. The trinity of fundamentals goes into anatomy, perspective, and observational drawing. Observational drawing is a method of approach on being able to transfer visual things you see in front of you, whether it's figurative based, still life, or even in dynamic sketching, which goes into various subject matter around the world. So we have to learn how to observe the real world in front of us, where anatomy is obviously about being able to understand the intricacies of the biology in the body, whether it's human or animal. And then, of course, in terms of perspective, being able to understand spatial sense of depth, right? So the combination of those systems will help you being able to go into more the intermediate, the more specifics of the fundamentals. Sorry, I'm going to go up a little bit again. Am I going to update my art stations from Vanzer? You want to show more of my recent works to friends and artists? Not necessarily. ArtStation I haven't used in a minute. It's still there. I will use it myself as well too in my classrooms to kind of show people some of the work I've uploaded on. But typically, I don't really upload a lot of work on there. Most of my stuff and content is always going to be on Instagram at this point. Still at this time, I have a website, but the website is pretty much static except for just a class registration update. That's just more of an archiving site to show information about who I am and whatnot. So the website's not really even a place for me, kind of showing updated work either too. But if Instagram for some reason falls apart and I had to leave, I would probably update our station at some point again more. Maybe jump onto some other social media site. Everyone seems to be wanting to try this Blue Sky thing, which I'm on there, but I don't really use it. How many times have people try to migrate from one social media platform to another one? It's not going to work, unless one thing completely dies and everybody transfers over. You're not going to post on 3 or 4 different social media sites the same thing. It's never worked in the past. So stick with one for the moment and just go with that. If you don't like one, then leave it and go to the other. But you got to be consistent. Let's go into the face. Oh, flip the fountain pen upside down to get some thinner lines. Because of the distance of the shot, I'm not going to get a lot of intricate detail into his face. Again, it's a relatively larger drawing, but it's still small scale in comparison to everything else. So in the face right now, I can only do so much. And so being able to maybe somewhat indicate it. I'm also going to bring in some lines that kind of brings in the sense of movement, motion. So I'm going to use some hatching to kind of create a little bit of movement effects. Maybe inside the hair. So you'll see me flip the pen upside down, go back to the original, upside down, back to the original. Thin line, thick line. The benefit of a fountain pen. And most, if not all, fountain pens can do this. Not just one special type or something like that. Okay, we're gonna have his leg come up down this direction. Pushing off. His other leg will be higher here. Just a silhouette. Some type of knee armor design. Some other materials of clothing, cloth. Silhouette just pushing the dark value. To his other leg. This will be part of the saddle. We'll give it some stirrups. And the tail's gonna go back that direction here. The rear leg of this animal creature. A bit higher. I want it up here in this region. This is the back leg. Animal. Thigh to the knee area. Lower leg to the heel. Loose. Loose sketching. These toes will curl inwardly, kicking up some visual effect. This leg I'm going to put down on the ground. I wanted it a bit higher, but I think this is okay. So this foot will be on the ground plane, touching the ground. This foot on the ground plane, lifting the foot off, kicking off on that one. Trotting along, pushing the tail off in that direction. More visual effects. Dust, smoke, or not smoke, but dust effects. We'll come back to some of these details and start cleaning them up, refining them. As we go. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Let's zoom out a little bit. And I want to put another animal back over here. Maybe like turning away that direction. We'll come back to more of the details on the weapon soon. Anything else on the animal? I'm not really on this particular mount. There's not much else I would need to create. I have all the elements that I need. Long rear legs. Let's go to this side. So I think the other creature can be up here. But I want it facing away as if it's kind of moving and running along. Give it like crazy horns too. I want it to be a slight up angle so its jaw structure, mandibles. Will be below here like this. Some vegetable leftover kind of wings. Not really functional, but more visual. Put its eyes up here. Same thing, tail be kind of pushing off that direction. The front claws coming over here in this direction. Let's push the legs back over here. Get to your questions in just a moment. Just establishing the rest of the drawing right now. Turn the tail back this way. So we'll tackle that in just a moment. I wanted to make sure I established where it was going to go. We're going to go back into this main feature and push heavier on that. So it's push more to the foreground. So all the stuff in the background won't be distracting. So let's go back to some of the more questions here. Ahmed is asking, when you copy from artists or students, should we do it with intention and see how they problem solve, or is it bad as we don't know what they think and drawing will be mindless? What we're trying to do is assume. You're trying to put yourself in the place of that artist and what they maybe have done with the outcome of the image you're looking at, because obviously that image is singular. You can't watch somebody actually having done it unless you're watching a video. Of course, that's helpful. But if you only have a static photograph, or not a photograph, but more of, let's say, a scan or the image that you have in front of you, you have to kind of like retrace it. Not trace it directly on top, but retrace its steps. How did they get to that point? And because you can't watch how they did it, you have to be able to assume as best you can. But by copying it, you might come to some idea as to how it was done. So there is an element of problem solving, and there's an element of a lot of assumed learning because you're not necessarily picking the brain of that one person directly. They're not telling you how they did it. But as you do a master copy, that's all you can do. Especially if you looked at some artists' work from back when they're, hundreds of years ago. There's no information about what they did or how they did it. There might be data information about materials and maybe some written description about their processes, or maybe they have a book about what they've done. But there may be some classical artists that you have no information on except for just the art you see. But based on that, all you can do is by copying it, come to a better conclusion as an idea of how, right? But it's not true per se. But you are going in there with the intention of trying to problem solve. Okay, let's keep going into this part of the character. Let me keep zooming in a little bit more back into where we were. Some of the details of the weapon. Using a little bit of line weight, contrasting to help kind of pull it more forward. And we're in about what, an hour right now? So we probably started about, 10 minutes after, maybe 20 minutes after we actually started streaming. So this is probably about under an hour of work at the moment with the, constant back and forth of questions. So in reality of time, you're probably looking at about a 45-minute drawing at the pump at this current feed for now. On my own time, something like this would be a little bit quicker. But speed is not really the thing here. It's like you don't want to always just move fast. But in reality, in terms of time scale, it's kind of what we're looking at right now. So whatever you're working at the moment, if you feel like you're really behind or you're not really kind of keeping up, don't be concerned by that. Work at your pace. Don't be overly concerned about trying to match, and just be aware more of your decision making and the experience of just learning from successes and mistakes. Some kind of upper armor set, little armor design down here, little shapes and markings and intricacies about the plating of the armor, maybe some sort of cultural elements, shape designs. And we're just kind of making up as we go. Indicating mark making. Let's go back into the saddle. See some more questions here. What would it take to work with an artist like me on an independent project? My independent project? Usually, that's not something I would do in terms of inviting other people to work on things. If it was an independent project, then it's purely mostly mine. In the future, would I ever, let's say, like hire outside people to work on an independent project I'm generating my own? I doubt it because I probably don't usually have the budget for something like that. So if I wanted to pay somebody, I probably wouldn't be able to, get moving forward because I don't have the capital built for it. But if it was an independent project backed by some funding, then maybe I would hire other artists from the outside, friends or otherwise. But for myself, any sort of independent project I'm doing, let's say like books and comics, I usually handle everything. I have hired students in the past in terms of helping me with certain other things logistically, whether it's like the bookmaking process, other things like packing, that sort of thing. But in terms of actually making the content, usually I haven't really done that. There may be like guest artists here and there that might do for like a book collection that I'm doing or a sketchbook or something like that. But again, it's more of a rare occurrence. Not something I normally do. So I wish there were more opportunities and stuff like that. But like I said, things require money. So in any sort of independent project, having the budget and the money for that is quite hard to come by. Let's go to more questions. Um, so Jay Decker's asking, any advice for designing 2D shapes that are both visually appealing yet provide information about the 3D form planes? Well, I mean, again, when it comes to shape design and being able to, let's say, convey something appealing, what is appealing to you? And so, as you're able to look at designs that have existed in the past, you use it as a jumping off point, right? As a inspirational point to be able to generate your own stuff from there. But you have to collect that data, which is then a lot of research. Mood boards really help a lot. I need to push a bit more into this. So, we spend a lot of time researching most of the time in that case, finding a direction of set appeal of style, of general aesthetics and whatnot. And that's within the industry. So you would need to also spend that time as well too, generating a good sense as to like what it is you're trying to go for, right? But beyond just interesting shapes that are visually appealing, then about the sense of form, then we're talking about visually conveying it within a certain angle of view so you can actually perceive that. So then of course the question is, what kind of image are you generating, right? If it's purely about design, then it shouldn't really matter about illustration to convey that, because if you're just trying to show interesting forms, you might do things like turnarounds, or conceptual sort of like sheets of illustrations and drawings that show you multiple iterations of poses and whatnot. But the concept art can still be made, but usually concept art is more about setting, mood, that sort of stuff. And design is more about the functionality, how things work, how they're brought together, the unity of a consistent world. I'm gonna just drop all this stuff in the shadow. The rear portion of the leg, just silhouette, maybe some blur motion. See some other questions here. What kind of businesses do I usually have besides teaching? Well, school and teaching is kind of the primary thing that I do. Besides that, any sort of freelance job that I'll pick up, illustration work as well too, is usually only a handful of times a year. And so I'm usually selective as to like what I want to work on, and it can range. In the past number of years, I would have done stuff for things like comic covers, or actual design work for shows, games. I would do gallery shows. Books are obviously another component. So I'm still working on books like right now. One for publishing, one for my own. So I usually try to produce a couple of books if I can. The last couple of years, it's been really isolated to just the live drawings on location stuff. The one book I've done with that Dynamic Bible, which was years ago now. Typically, I'd be producing multiple books a year, but recently it's been more focused towards the classrooms and the school. So since COVID, really trying to establish a strong, consistent community within that field where all my energy went. Not making new books, but making the community of my schoolwork. So now that this kind of established well, to this year into next year, I like to be able to produce more books now at this point. So if it's a book a year, that would be ideal. And does that alone sustain me in terms of financially? Yeah, it does. Is it consistent to a degree, but nothing is guaranteed. You know, things like my classes in schools. At some point, there could be just people that stop coming. And I can't control that. Hopefully, based on my activity of engaging and generating opportunities and working with people, and the constant sort of word of mouth sort of forward projection, it'll attract more and more to keep coming. So I would like to keep my classes running as long as possible. And at this point, it's as long as I can sustain it, based on me physically, but also mentally as well too. But I'm interested in keeping my classes running as long as I can. But beyond that, it's just again, like I said, any opportunity of projects that I have, I'll grab if I can. And of course, I would still love to be able to produce or promote personal independent project as something in the future. If that would ever happen, I don't know. But the idea of a dream of like generating a show or a game or something like that based on my concept is something I would love to have. Um, but you know, we'll see. One of the next one of the classes, they right now my classes are at week 6, so we should be ending by the end of this month. So the next one of the classes should be end of April, middle to end of April. Registration will be at the beginning of April. Do I have any tips from drawing form? Well, with drawing form, being able to convey plane is a good first step. So obviously the cube is one of the forms that we tend to draw a lot. Observational study is a big component as well too. Being able to see actual form structures in front of you, cubes, cylinders, whatever object you have, being able to convey that onto the page. Material wise, don't worry about it so much. Just being able to actually build a visual language of many different forms you can start to play with. And then of course, the endless amounts of references and content within curated books of education or otherwise, you want to peruse through as much as possible to be able to see the culmination of all that information put together by other people too. So that way, it gives you kind of a direction to follow. Whether you actually take a class or not, yeah, books are still going to be helpful because it does kind of like help bring it into a singular sort of like edited platform. But at the end of the day, I think some form of encouragement, advice, interaction with the community, being in a classroom would be the most helpful. Being able to exercise that in a more consistent manner, but also having an environment where it shows you a lot of feedback and dialogue on being able to help control those, but also apply them. Right. Put some more shadow down here. A little bit more hatching. Zoom out a little bit to see the whole entire thing for the moment. Come back into it. This is kind of a recessed area going back, coming forward. Just using some hatching to blend some areas out. Eric, thanks for the donation. Appreciate that for $2. An odd question, Integrity is asking, but what games do you usually play? You're currently on Dark Souls Remastered playthrough and it's just as tough as it's said to be. Currently, right now, I am playing Monster Hunter, The Wilds. I just finished up on Kingdom Come, the Deliverance 2. I didn't play the first one. I was aware of it, but then it kind of fell off the radar. I think I saw like a preview trailer, and then I thought it was kind of cool looking, and then forgot about it. And that was years ago when it came out. But the second one, all of a sudden, it caught my attention. I do like, sort of like historical, sort of inspired games. Doesn't have to be fantasy based, but Kingdom Come at first was a little bit. I wasn't sure as to what it really was. But then, as I started watching a lot more preview videos, people talking about it, it looked really interesting. So I give it a try, and it was an investment, and I played it through quite a bit. I'm done with it now. I beat it, but it was a pretty incredible game. I really do like immersive worlds for sure, and they certainly did create a very immersive world in the game. So Kingdom Come, I would highly recommend. But besides that, I've played many different sort of games. I don't play as like often now as I used to when I was much younger. Because when I was younger, I always wanted to play like every day. You know, Today, I'll play a handful of hours one day and then not be on it for a couple of days. Um, so usually very very like immersive long term games, I'm a little bit kind of apprehensive to start, but certain ones I really have to try. And then once I'm in it, I have to be patient because I can't play it all the time. But when I do, I very much enjoy it. But Wild right now is pretty cool. It's the story's kind of whatever. The gameplay's interesting and fun. It does get a little bit repetitive now, but I do like the look of it. Designs are really cool. Creatures are awesome. The world building of the biome, the ecosystem is really nice. I think it's a little bit more kind of sort of immersed into the world multi-level, where in the other one, Worlds was that way as well too, but it felt more like an arena, and I wasn't too fond of it, to be honest with you. I feel like the biodiversity in this new game is a lot stronger, based on my experience so far. I just like the way the creatures kind of interact with the world a bit better. It feels more natural, which is really nice. I would say if my favorite game of all time would be Red Dead 2. That game I played two or three times over, and I just really enjoyed the way the world behaved again. Very natural, but I like the historical aspect of it. And anything fantasy or sci-fi based I like too. But Elden Ring, stuff was cool too, and the Dark Souls stuff was great. And I don't really have a prejudice to any sort of games that are out there. If they're interesting and fun, I used to be super into fighting games when I was younger. Loved racing games. I was a huge fan of point and click. LucasArts games. Played all of them. The one I used to play constantly was the Dig. Most of you probably don't even know that one, unless you're a little older than me, older like me. Eric is asking any tips on going from the less finished sketch, like the dinosaur feet right now, to a more finished pen drawing with all the wrinkles, scales, and shadows like the dinosaur head at the moment. Well, be selective though. Just because you have it loose doesn't mean it has to be tightened up. It can remain loose and just be more of a shadow of a shape, where the detail attention can be placed in specifically in one area. So it doesn't have to be so defined. It's more about decision making as to where you place it, not about how every single part of it needs to be finished. Finished is relative, in terms of how you can define that. Um, what do you actually even mean when it says finished? Does it even have to use that word, finished, right? Is it more than about the communication? What are you trying to say? Not about this idea of a finished goal. Any advice for those of us that went to art school and became disillusioned with institutionalized approach to art? Well, I mean, now you know, right? It's better that you do know than not know, because there are people out there that haven't gone through those institutional schools can only assume. But regardless of that, even if you become a little bit disillusioned or disappointed with the resulting action, you probably still have learned something, and you may have also still met some good people. Hopefully, it doesn't guarantee it, and I'm sure the experience may not have always resulted in that for you, or for others that are here. But I would say it's not a waste of time, because as you now also have context as to what that experience is like, you know that you don't want to go back to it. But now you have an opinion. You can say something about it because you've gone through it. If you just assume and go by what other people are saying, and other people say, "Oh, don't go to college, don't go to these institutions because it was a bad thing for me." Well, yeah, it might have been a bad thing for them, but it doesn't mean it's guaranteed bad thing for you. So the idea is to find out on your own. The audio is a bit distorted. Is anybody else experiencing that right now? Hopefully not. Most likely because I'm looking down and up constantly. So let me check something real quickly. I actually changed my decibels. Maybe that's distorting it. Let me change it back. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, let's take a look at some other questions. Let me turn off one of the mics too. There seems to be two mics on right now. This is on my OBS. This one is my microphone Yeti. Let me turn this one off. I turned one of them off, so hopefully that changes it. Mont, good to hear. Keep drawing, please. The last chrono is saying, do I ever use or ask, do I ever use pencils as an underlay? I used to all the time. Not so much anymore. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing if you do. How come I don't anymore? I don't need to. Would there ever be a case in which I would? Sure, if it called for it, for like an illustration piece that needed to be approved, I may do that. But typically, I will go through a thumbnail process instead, and they just kind of go directly in there. Or I'm intending to do a pencil sketch or a pencil drawing because I want to use the material, not because the material is some sort of like handicap that allows me to do something that I can't with ink. Pencil and underlays are, again, like I said, a fine process. Pencil in itself is a great material, but I don't need to do it as an underlay. So if I want to use pencil, it's because I want to do a pencil drawing. Let's see. Dead Geek Society is asking, have I've been trying to get back into drawing for a while now. Sorry, that's the question. Give me 1 second. But you struggle with consistency and struggle to make practice fun. So, would you have any advice as to how I can be more consistent? So, when you're trying to make practice fun, it can be difficult because practice in the initial rounds of your guys' education is, I mean, it can be real. It's not fun. Right? Training and practicing is not entertaining because, for one, it's very grinding, right? It's very tedium based, it's very monotonous mentally because you're just repeating the same sort of primitive thing over and over again. But also, a lot of times, practicing can be difficult because someone else is telling you to do it. Maybe some book, some class, some instructor tells you do this practice in this way. So because you're trying to fulfill someone else's, let's say, actions, it's not as interesting to you. So it's not as fun. So then people try to define that by two separate things. Well, I'll draw fun things for myself, and then I'll train on the side. What I usually respond to is like trying to put those things together. You should be training and also be doing having fun at the same time. But again, if I'm going to be real about that, in school of education, that's not always the reality, right? When we train and practice, we can't always contextualize it or change the perception of our mind to somehow make it fun, because it may not be. And inherently, it's not really set up to be that way. It's set up as education to learn something from as a practice physically and mentally and visually. So it's not built as a fun thing to begin with. But it doesn't mean that I can't find a way to make it fun through other means. So this idea of training fundamentally, which is practice, which is a bit mundane, a little bit boring, not as fun, but I will then use it for something that is fun for me. Structurally, or maybe like not even structure really, more of a thematically. What it is subject matter wise I could draw. Maybe it's characters or creatures or vehicles or weapons. But I'll use what I learned in that fundamental and stitch it over to the side. That's what I'm saying and trying to bring it together. The fundamental exercise has to be used for something. But it's not used for something that is based on only on the exercises. I gotta create with it. If I learn how to anatomically build an animal of some kind, well, let's change it and make it some kind of creature, right? If I build forms, let's take those forms and make it some sort of creatively interesting thing, building structures or architecture, whatever the case is, um, whatever. But the idea is you got to find a way to bring them as an overlap. But that takes time, and being in an educational sort of environment in the beginning, it doesn't allow you to do so sometimes because some instructors might suppress it. Some schools may not allow it. Some schools might even have certain sort of like um, the ways in how they perceive things like entertainment design. A lot of traditional schools may say like manga or anime is not a good thing. That they think it's actually not valuable. A lot of my instructors back in art center used to say that. It's like comics and mangas are still for kids. But that's what I work on. That's what I like to look at, and that's what I also like to experience myself. So today, of course, the education is a little bit different, but it doesn't mean that you can't or you wouldn't face that sort of stuff. But on your own time, as you're still training, I still think it's important that you do find moments on being able to adapt it, use it, and have fun with it. And if you can't, then it'll always be stuck as a sort of practice, and it becomes then a thing that you kind of have a view on, which is not very attractively fun to do. So then you have to force yourself, and that just takes a lot of energy out of you. Will I be coloring this one? Not necessarily today. How do you accurately copy something? Sometimes the proportions of my copy looks completely different compared to the original piece. It's going to be different no matter what. So here's basically the question: if I'm looking, let's say, at a picture of a bird, again, we're going back to the bird, and I'm drawing that bird, how do I make it more one to one? True one to one, you would trace it. You put a piece of tracing paper on top of the photograph and you trace it. That will be one to one, right? As soon as you separate that and you go into freehand drawing, because then that's what we're talking about. Tracing it is being able to follow something, right? But as we then freehand sketch it, we're using our eyes to judge sizing, distancing, depth, two dimensional on a piece of paper, using line and shape and form. So because that action of freehand and observation looking at it, there's going to be at least a 1% difference between the image and to your image. A 1% difference would be nice because that's very close. But in reality, most times we're quite far off, right? Proportionally, structurally, line wise, spatially, dense, depth wise, whatever the case might be, details. So the first thing you have to change is the mentality and the fact that you're not trying to copy in the first place. We're trying to interpret it, unless the intention is to copy it. I'm trying to be as close as possible to it. So what do? We repeat as many times as we can. The more you repeat, the closer you begin to get into that area of exactness because you're able to judge things better, right? Well, is there another system? Well, here what other artists tend to do, especially traditionalists and especially certain artists from, let's say, like wildlife art, portraiture art. What they'll do is take a photograph and they'll grid it into box compartments, right? And they'll grid it to a certain square count. Then you would scale that up to a certain sizing of your dimension to the same grid count as to the photograph to your version, and each square has a certain amount of information in there. And you would transfer the information of detail into each square. So the gridding approach is something that's been done for whatever God knows long. So you can do that if you want to, and there are many artists that do this. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a technique on being able to transfer the referencing information over to your illustration. They will do this for things like murals. They'll do this for things like portraiture art. Whatever the case is. Do I use that? No, I don't. Because I things. Because I'm not looking for a direct copy. It's used as inspiration of reference to give me guidance of visual to be able to do with it on my own. Even it is somewhat similar of like a pose or detail to the thing I'm looking at in reference. But I still have the control to be able to kind of bring over what I want to do. Sorry if that was long winded, but that's the idea. Halo is asking, did I play Death Stranding? I did. I started it, but I didn't finish it. I didn't fully. It didn't click again. One of those games. It's one of those I think I have to just spend more time on things. I didn't mind the atmosphere. I love this idea of a game that you just kind of walk, because it was just a big delivery system game. But there were times in which I wasn't sure if it was me actually playing it or if it's just you just watching it, you know. And I think that's what Kojima games are like, which is just it's kind of an interactive movie most of the times. You just kind of go from point A to point B, and stuff just happens. So at first, I think I was expecting one thing, and then I wasn't really quite sure what it was at first. But that, like I said, I think I have to put more time into it. I might go back and try to play it again because the second one, the trailer did come out, and I did see it, but I don't know. Maybe it's the world. It hasn't really grabbed me. It is weird. Kojima is weird when it comes to his ideas. So I guess some things just don't make sense. But then I would argue like, well, Metal Gear doesn't make sense. But to me, like Metal Gear makes total sense. Like I know, everything about it. But that's that investment of time, I guess, right? The more you immerse yourself to the lore and the logic, then you're in it. But in the beginning, it's just so overwhelming. I'm gonna switch over to the different pen right now. This one is all right. I'm gonna have to flush it out and refill it. It's good, but I'm noticing the ink is a little bit. I don't know if it's slightly dried out on the inside, something, but I feel like it's not as fluid or flowing as well as it normally should. But it might be just paper too. This paper is quite textured. Typically, I would use like a brush pen. Let's keep going over a different tool. Let's try this one again. Let's get some more questions here. We're about hour and 40 minutes. We're gonna go to about maybe 9:15 my time, 9:30 at the latest. Seth is asking, have I always drawn what I liked and let clients come to you, or have you found the need to pursue specific subjects or styles to land work? Well, in the beginning, I would say, I mean, no matter what, if you're making a portfolio, you're still generating stuff that you like. But as a student, when you're trying to get into, let's say, an industry of some type, like a company, you got to generate work that does, align well to whatever industry you are looking at. So if I wanted to work in games and I'm looking at these several studios, the stuff that I'm generating has to match up to it, right? In terms of story or what the design is, that can vary. But in terms of like the style set and also how I'm doing it, I'd want to make sure that the portfolio conveys that in a nice sort of like cohesive yet in a parallel to the industry that I'm trying to aim for. Today, I very much produce things that of my own interest, my own style, my own sort of properties, and then attract the companies to come to me to have them work on their stuff, which I would still then need to conform to their brand, but they can see that I have the abilities on being able to generate work that is maybe aligned to what they're doing. So then I'm kind of like headhunted because they're not coming to me as a general concept artist or visual development artist. They're looking to me because I align as to what they think visually they're trying to aim for. So they will have me come in and start to help visualize, but sticking to what I normally do. But as a student, I wouldn't have been able to get that kind of work. Today, that's the kind of work I primarily have to do, which is a lot of blue skying, a lot of like early pre-production, being able to give them my takes of stuff. So I've had projects numerous times where they would just hand me a script saying, just do your version, show it to us. And it's not necessarily like, even like pre-production. And it's definitely not production, but it's some of the earlier pitch work that helps them greenlight it or something like that, right? So they can get a budget for it. So many times when I work on a project, I wouldn't even get credit on it because it hasn't even started. It's so early in their phase, and a lot of those projects don't even get greenlit. So as I would work on something, designing a bunch of things, it would never see the light of day. It would just get archived somewhere. And so, would I be allowed to share that? Sometimes, but I have to let time pass too, until they can approve by saying, "Oh, you can show that stuff now because it's archived." Sometimes you can't; they won't let you. Certain companies, especially bigger brands of animations, they have a lot of internal teams that do a lot of IP development. So a lot of those projects that are internally developed that are never shown because they never get greenlit, you'll never see them again. And those artists that made them are not allowed to take it out with them to show it because it's not their property. It's the company's property. That's the reality of a corporate. industry. That work is not yours. You know, you've been hired as a full-time artist to work under that company, and you've been contracted for it. So that's where it stays. Feeling pretty good now that this whole area starts to really control a lot more detail. It really pops it up to the front. This creature in the back, we're gonna lightly detail now. It's not gonna go as dark as this, but we'll start to kind of add more details here. Not as heavily, but just enough. Accents. I'm not even gonna place in like heavy contrast, shadow shape, that sort of stuff. Purely just more of like accent and little detail work. I'll zoom in closer. Glad the audio cleared up, by the way. How do I go about adding colors to my inks? Do I do it digitally or add color by markers or watercolor? Mostly watercolor a lot of times, Cyberyak. Marker I'll use once in a while, but the problem with markers and why I don't recommend it to most people is because it's expensive. Meaning, to get the variety of value and saturation of colors, you need to buy a lot of markers, you know? So with watercolor, with a single set, let's say like the one I would recommend many students get is something like this. This is just a Winsor Newton Cotman. And these Cotmans are great. They're small, like 12, 12-piece sets, 24-piece sets, and it allows you to get, a very limited palette for a low cost of maybe like, 20 some dollars. And you have a whole range of saturation and values you can make with this stuff. So you have a lot more flexibility with a lower price point with watercolor. But the problem with watercolor is that it's not a very forgiving material. It does take a lot of time to get accustomed to how to like blend it and work with it using water and whatnot. But I'm not going to say that marker's any easier, to be honest with you. I think marker takes a lot of patience. Smash Crack is asking, which pens would you recommend? Get gel rollers? Don't seem to do well on my sketch pads. Honestly, just the felt tip pens. Like the Faber Castells are usually really good. But it's the problem, of course, is I don't know what paper you're using. Whatever paper you have, depending on the material, some will behave a little better than others. Gel pens usually are okay, but they can be really finicky in their own way as well too, especially in terms of manufacturing quality and just overall feel on it to a paper. If the paper is really smooth, sometimes they work really well. Other times it can be really, really scratchy. So that it's not consistent, through the board. Would I recommend fountain pens? Yeah, to be honest with you, I would. But not everybody can either afford a pen like this one. But if you're gonna buy a fountain pen, I would actually look at a really cheap one called the Platinum Desktop Pen. Platinum Desktop Pen. It's like $8-9. It's one of the best smooth lines you can get from a fountain pen. It's cheap. It's crappy. It's made of plastic, so it doesn't feel very nice. But man, it draws really well. It usually takes a cartridge, but I think you can put a converter in it, and it uses the same ink as this here. This is the same company, Platinum. Platinum Carbon ink and the Platinum Desktop Pen. Cheapest fountain pen you can find, and one of the best ones for artists, in my opinion. But from there, over time, as you become more accustomed to fountain pens, I would experiment to different brands and different styles and different looks and whatnot. Because as great as the desktop pen is, um, it's not the only one that draws really well. So I like these Esterbrook's a lot. They handle nicely. They draw nicely as well too. It's a bit higher price point, but I'm also a collector. I like buying these sort of things to collect to have and have variations of them, and I'm interested in the branding and the materials and all that sort of stuff. I'm gonna push the line weight around this creature here. And a very light amount of hatching on this background animal. Some kind of crazy dragon thing. sort of wing structure. Give it claws up here on the end. Sullivan saying, in your opinion, Death Stranding looks like an interesting world, but boring to play in. So not worth the journey. Being confused 90% of the time. Do you? Yeah, I mean, I think it very much feels that way in the beginning to me too, because it's not a very rich world. It feels like a very real world because a lot of the different lands are very arid and dry and unpopulated. You know, so it's very much just landscape. Um, but as a gamer, maybe you're looking for more, right? More immersion, more story, more fantasy, whatever the case is. But I don't know. I think it looked interesting to me, and I still want to try it and really get more out of it because I still very much do like Kojima games. So Death Stranding to me visually was really cool. I think design wise was great. Costuming, prop work, mechanical stuff, the vehicle designs. I thought it looked awesome. Just some texture on the skin here a little bit. Sorry, I'm going off the page right now. Zoom out a bit more. Let's move it over here. See some more of the comments. Integrity was saying, "Have I checked out the Cyberpunk uh, after its updates and DLCs? If so, what do I think of it?" To be honest with you, Cyberpunk 2077 from the very beginning of its release, I enjoyed. I played it on my PC, and I played it when it first released, and I beat it, and I played it another time. I think it's an incredible game. Despite its sort of like tumultuous release and people had a tough time with it, I still thought it was a really really amazing game. After a lot of the updates and stuff like that, yeah, it optimized it, ran a lot smoother for consoles and stuff like that. But on my PC, I had no issues. I don't have necessarily like the most powerful PC, but what I had was great. It worked just fine. So I thought it was a really amazing game. Again, that Cyberpunk to me was also one of those that I thought was super immersive. I remember still to playing it and having this moment, and that's when it really when I bought into it. And it was a moment where you're following one of the characters in the car, not behind them, but you're in the car with them, and you're just going to a destination. Now you could have skipped that scene by just pressing the button; it would take you to that next location. But you could have just also sat there and drove with that character for the entire time. And I remember you have a little dialogue, and after the dialogue, then it would say you can press this button to skip it. But I just kept being in that car, just riding along. And I would just look out the window. It was raining, and it had music in the background from the radio, and man, it was just felt like you were there. you know. Uh, and I once that moment happened, I just kind of like took a moment, like this is a really amazing game. I knew what they were trying to do, and they built a very believable world. Um, so from then on, I was super into it. So yeah, I liked it quite a bit. Question is it possible to buy the Dynamic Bible and the upcoming Bible 2 in Japan from Superani Japan and others? I believe so. Superani in Korea should be able to ship them out as well too. In Korea, just Superani. It's the Kim Jong Il website, I believe. You should be able to just go to them and email them directly, and you can get copies of the Dynamic Bible from them now. The second one should be coming out by hopefully this summer, and once they have it printed, then yeah, same sort of thing. You can just directly contact them. Dravia is asking or saying, you've also started trying to draw from the imagination, but you mess up a lot in proportions, and I think that your visual library is not so strong. How do you think I should improve it? Well, more observation. Study more of things in the real world. If your proportion is incorrect, well, what in proportion do you need to make better? Is it sizing of things? Is it length of stuff? Is it height of certain areas? It's not anatomical. We're talking about the ideas of length, sizing, and scale, right? Um, so based on then what you see in reality, can you match up to it closer? From there, can you then also alter it in the ways you want to? Because this is an animal that doesn't exist, but I can pull from inspiration and make my own versions of it, right? So this is where the constant observations of things are going to be critical at that point. How long do you do that? For as long as it takes, right? And it's an undetermined amount of time. For some people, it'll take much longer, maybe even a lifetime, to be able to do that. In terms of a distinctly accurate, sort of visual library. For others, it'll click very quickly. Andre is also saying the Sailor Fude pen is the Manin is a great bang for the buck. Yeah, I would say it's a pretty good one. It's a little bit cheap feeling, but the Sailor brand is solid. Do I take any caffeine or coffee and such? Yeah, once in a while. Um, I have a coffee in the morning, once, but not every day. Um, for me, it's more of a taste situation. I like the taste of coffee. When I was younger, like an art center, I didn't drink coffee at all. No energy drinks. I don't drink any energy drinks now. No Red Bulls, stuff like this, Monsters. I would have one, or two in like a year, just to have one because it's available. But I don't seek them out. But coffee, I like going to a cafe just to hang out the draw. So I'll have a coffee there, like a cappuccino or something like that. Whenever I go to Europe, I love drinking the cafes there. The small little espressos or something like that. But here in the US, even like Starbucks, I don't drink a lot of it. I usually just make coffee at home. A little bit of syrup, one scoop of cream, and just a little bit of coffee. Thanks for sharing the material and pen suggestions, Andre. Which drawing tool do I like most drawing the most? As I said earlier, the fountain pens. Fountain pen is my kind of my go-to. It's my everyday carry. When working through the dynamic Bible, when I get stuck, is it better to take what I understand and move on, or would it be better to hit my snags as many times as I need to get through it? It's both. It's not one or the other. It's not being able to move away from the parts in which you're having a difficult time with and moving on into other things, or even going back to stuff you're familiar with. That's great to have as a moment to kind of like regain some enthusiasm and energy. But there are times in which you also have to stick it through, having the discipline and the drive to kind of overcome it. It may not always work to the level of precision that you want, but being able to have at least some handle. So being able to muscle through, right? But you don't want to do that all the time because if you're constantly hitting your head against a brick wall, you're only going to injure yourself. You're not actually going to break through it. So what it comes down then to is how do you go about problem solving? Do you just punch through the wall, or do you find some other way to overcome it? Going to the same goal, right? So it could be different ways of approaching the exercise. Maybe some other things in the past, the previous exercise that you may have missed. What is there that you could use to help maybe traverse a different sort of pathway? It could be turning to others, how other people can help you along as well too. So then feedback, community, individuals joining forces. There are all the elements that you need to be able to help, like I said, overcome those snags that you might face. Zoom out a little bit. Let's go back to this rear portion of the animal now. Let's create like horns, spikes, bit of texture. This is part of the rear leg here. Again, I don't want to lose focus to this main character. So whatever's back there is just light as possible. All right, so let's see what the questions we might have. What do I use for coloring my drawings? As I said earlier, it was mostly watercolor. You're saying that a lot of super runny guys tend to use things like colored pencils and pencils, but what do I like more? Watercolor again. I don't really use colored pencil. I'll use it to like draw with, but never really to like color with. I don't have a watercolor set. No, I'm sorry, a color pencil set for color. I never really use a lot of pastel. I've had sets of them when I was a kid, but never really used them before. Pastels, let alone oil pastels. Color pencil when I was younger, I may have played with a little bit here and there, but today, not so much. I think people can produce really cool stuff with it. I think combining color pencil with paint is better for me. So using color pencil with watercolor is a really nice combination. What was my favorite comic book growing up? There was never one single one, I would say, and definitely went through phases. I was introduced to more Western comics when I was younger in the beginning, and then a lot more Asian comics when I got into my teens. But when I was younger, I was very much a Marvel Comics fan. But if I was to single out one favorite comic today, maybe not when I was young and growing up, but through my ages, if I can come to a single comic series or book now that I would want to always turn to, I mean, I can't deny, but the thought of Akira comes up, you know. Um, but let's not say Akira per se, like from Otomo, because Otomo is one of my most, I guess, inspired individual I looked at most of the time. But Katsuhiro Otomo, I think probably the one book I looked at when I was younger that really like captured me was Domu, Domu, and that was one of the books he did prior to Akira. If you never read that one before, check that one out. It's pretty crazy. Domu. But most of Otomo's work was just insane. In terms of Marvel stuff, I was highly inspired by guys like Jim Lee. Um, Obviously in the '90s, but then growing up, looking at like the Marvel stuff from Buscema and even Kirby, to be honest with you, became a lot more prominent of interest for me as I got older. And of course, can't deny Dragon Ball and Toriyama, which I used to imitate and copy all the time. I'm starting to kind of nitpick now, which is close to signs of me being done with this particular image. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to do to it. Maybe just some extra little lines and marks and textures, accents of surfacing, but generally, I think we're pretty much there. Get back into the close up, see if there's anything on this particular side of the focal section, the front of the animal. Just push the line weight a bit more, really emphasizing the silhouette. And then we'll be calling it good. I'd like to be able to do another stream hopefully next week. Ideally, maybe around the same time on Monday. Maybe I'll aim for that for now. If there's any other last comments, questions you guys would love to ask, Mythic was asking about the hatching line shading and started drawing again after a few years. And you're trying to find your own art style. Does this type of art style have a name? Not necessarily. I wouldn't call this a style per se. It's techniques of using line in certain ways to convey things like surfacing and value and whatnot. So hatching techniques for me mostly derived from a lot of artists from, let's say, the 1800s, 1890s to 1900s as well too. So a lot of classic illustrators from that time period within European to American. I would say I'd be looking at a lot guys like you know Charles Dana Gibson to Franklin Booth. Uh, for me, a huge component is Heinrich Klei, um, And of course, if you want to go a bit more modern day, even some of the fantasy artists, guys like Frazetta and whatnot, really amazing in terms of what they can do. Topi, Sergio Topi, as well too. Or if you want to go to like European comics, Mobius is probably the most influential to many comic artists out there and illustrators, myself included. Jean Girard, you can't deny his effect. Another artist I would say is like Juan Jimenez, another prolific and amazing graphic novelist. Or a person that recently passed, Frazzato, Massimiliano Frazzato, another amazing comic artist that I think most younger generations probably wouldn't know his work very well. But and he's not like old either, too. But his stuff was crazy. Frazzato. He was, I believe, Italian. Yeah, Italian. But he passed away not too long ago. It was amazing because I actually had chances to have dialogue with him online, and he was someone I looked at when I was in high school. I found out his work, Frazzato's work, when I was in literally ninth grade. I was like 14 years old, 15, and I was introduced to Heavy Metal magazine. Heavy Metal, if you guys don't know that one, was highly influential to me, and that's where I got to see Frazzato's work for the first time, and a lot of different sort of like European artists, guys like Milo Manara and Simon Bisley and whatnot. Those were some incredible, artists. So, in my teenage years in the 90s, heavy metal was a big thing. Barely, I was saying you spend a lot of hours on a few pages or on a few pages on just practicing cube perspectives, constructing, deconstructing, but you feel exhausted and can't create something new or do any concept art. Any advice? Use the cubes for something, right? Make something of it. If you draw a bunch of cubes, what do you see in them? Do you see vehicles? Do you see animals? And not saying that you have to put it in a subject matter inside the cube. The cube itself could be the head of this animal. The cube could be the body of this animal. And being able to adapt it to stuff that you want to create with. So you could practice all day as much as you want to based on, your studies of building forms, but building forms alone is not enough. You got to do something with them, right? So this is where you get to play. You got to start to imagine and play what do you see as those cubes. Andrew was saying something you wanted to ask. How do you pace yourself when it comes to drawing? I find that sometimes I forget my limits and burn yourself out. Timers. Put on a literal timer. Not to say that the timer has for you to stop. I convey this in my classes. When we use timers, it's not to say, hey, in 20 minutes, I'm going to draw, and at the end of the 20 minutes, I'm done. That's not the way timers can be used. Timers can be used as a way of a checkpoint. Add 10 minutes to sketch. After 10 minutes, then you say, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What am I trying to even do? Then you answer those questions by thought, add additional time, and keep drawing. Once you come to a point in which you felt like you've accomplished what you needed to do as intention, and the timer goes off, then you move on. But the timer allows you to kind of snap out of that mental process where you're so into the zone because you tunnel vision again, and all of a sudden you're not really thinking about what you're doing. How did I start learning to make characters? In school. So being in classes at school, learning, fundamental techniques on actually how to design is where it comes from. But it doesn't mean you can't create characters on your own anytime you want to. Be inspired by characters that you've seen before in the past, and then start making your versions of them, even in the style that you like. So I used to create characters in the style of Toriyama, Dragon Ball, but make up my own characters. Right? You can do that anytime you want to, and that's a form of practice. It may not be like educational in terms of standard of techniques, but it allows you to creatively explore. And those are still very, very useful as a learning process because play is a part of that. Okay, we're almost done here. I got to move on real soon because in about maybe 20 minutes, I have a meeting with a former mentorship. So I have to sit down with him and discuss his current projects as well too. And so I do offer mentorship programs, one-on-ones. And so these sort of experiences are where I get to sit with people for like an hour or two and give them a lot of advice, direction, that sort of stuff, on top of other people taking classes. So today I do have to kind of tend to that. So let's zoom out a little bit, see where we are, and we'll close this up real soon. Last couple questions and comments. How do you think I can study Mike Mignola's style? Well, as we talked about, the idea of copy is what I did. I can draw in Mike Mignola's style as well too, because I've copied it multiple times. Hellboy is a very, very imitatable character, especially in terms of the style of Mignola. But that's what you would start with, right? Images, sketches, drawings that he's produced or done. You'd want to try to imitate as much as you can. But again, imitation only takes you so far. You want to do that at first just to be able to get a sense about how the artist may have done it. And you find a way to be able to actually then incorporate it to your take on that information. So you don't want to be just a carbon copy of Mike Mignola, but you want to find the strengths of what he's done and then find your voice through it. Uh, Ultine's saying, you find yourself trying to add lines and texture all over the place. How do you know when it's too much before it's too much? Sometimes the best thing to do is kind of centralize and focus it. Intention by saying this area particularly is all I want information of detail to. Everything outside that area of focal point can be a little bit less. So you bring an intention of decision making as to like where you want it to be in the first place. As you choose, you stick with it. Be consistent. Discipline is a better word, actually. How do I learn to approach new subjects? Well, using the dynamic sketching approach, we learn how to break down a lot of things, and we can use those systems of very similar type of subjects within that family of grouping. So if I learn how to draw, let's say, one big cat, like a lion, and I can use that system to be able to build a tiger potentially. Have I ever heard of Tatsuya Yoshikawa or seen his work? He was an artist for Capcom, but does freelance now. If I saw the work, I probably would be familiar to it, but the name I'm actually not that familiar with, to be honest with you. Within Capcom, I'm only familiar with the guys from like the '90s again, and the people that kind of started it. Guys like Akiman and Bengus are the only two I'm really familiar with. Maybe that's what you're talking about because that's not his real name. That's just their kind of like stage name, I guess you would say it. I'm actually not familiar to their real name. I don't remember. Seth, in terms of the kind of paper I'm using right now, this is a paper that I bought from Italy, and it's called the Amalfi paper. An Amalfi is a certain location in Italy where they make this specific, I guess, paper type, all handmade. And I bought a giant ream of it, a stack of this sizing, from a certain paper company that's based in Amalfi. It wasn't cheap. It's not something I would recommend for everyday people to use because this stuff I use primarily to like actually generate illustrations and work like this. I wouldn't use it to study with per se. To study with, I would recommend like the Strathmore sketchbook 400 series. That's the one I recommend to most of my students. Strathmore 400. All right, I think we're pretty much good at this point. Chat seems to have kind of cooled off a little bit. In any case, I appreciate you guys kind of hanging about. There was a little bit of a hiccup in the beginning. I had to like tend to something, so I do apologize in the recording when you guys watch it again. But either way, I hope the experience of being able to be with us live is always engaging. I look forward to doing this more as we get into the next couple of months. For this month of March, I'm hoping to be on Monday as much as I can. Going into April, it'll be a period of time in which I'll be out for a little bit. I'll be traveling into Asia. But then once we go into like May, we'll see if I can pick it up again. But once we start to go into the summer, things get a little bit busy. So take advantage of the time of me being present with you guys. So like I said, next Monday, I'm going to try to be back on again. And if you guys can share, like, subscribe, that sort of stuff again, let other people know that this is going on. It will continue to entice me to keep coming back. And we'll go from there. So let's see. We have one last question popping in here. Great Eagle saying, is composition intuitive? You feel like half of it is intuition, other half is skill. It's a learned thing. Composition is about how you organize content of information within a frame. Best place to learn composition? Film. What do filmmakers do to tell a story? And how do they compose the frame to do it in an aesthetic manner? So, film composition is the best place to go. Michael, thanks for the clarification. He worked under Akiman. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. I know what you're talking about then. Because I'm very familiar with the Breath of Fire stuff in terms of the work. But I never picked up the name, to be honest with you. But no, that stuff is great. Definitely. For those of you that are joining in now, I apologize, but we are wrapping up our live stream now. This is the piece we had just done completed. But next time I come back in, we'll probably work on this paper again. I don't know what I'll be doing next time, but I'll think about it a little bit, and we'll have one more round. So for now, thank you guys for hanging out. Appreciate it. Thanks for everyone being interactive and engaging, asking questions. I hope people picked up some things here as we had some time together. But we'll see you hopefully next Monday.